Now, next we have Mr. Scott Harding.
Scott is what I like to call a true all-rounder. He has 21 years' experience working in public, private, independent schools in UK and in Australia. Scott emigrated from the UK to be an eventual second-in-charge position in the English department at Brisbane Boys College, and from there he has been a driving force of a young school, Springfield Anglican College, shaping their English department. Scott's also the co-founder of PRAC-E, as he believes strongly in sending the elevator back down, so to speak, to support early career teachers. And Scott teaches French and English, BBC and TSAC, and is an expert in pastoral education.
And Scott, you were talking about, what you elected to talk about was the actual nuts and bolts of behaviour management, funnily enough, ironically enough.
Well, you like that, I'm not a performer like Louis, so I'm going to sit here, if that's all right with you. Look, I think the most important thing I would stress to start with is to run your classroom properly. It's not so much behaviour management, but it's about preparation. So preparation is the key. So you've got your job, you're setting up your classroom, you're about to walk in there. 3 or 4 days before you go in there, all right, you should be thinking about your approach, your mental approach to teaching, okay? Because I guarantee you, 5, 6, 7 weeks into your first term, you're going to be very, very tired. Very, very tired indeed, all right? Your internship is one thing, but actually learning to teach in your first year is completely another thing. It's like your driving test and then actually driving, okay? So it's very, very different. You're going to have challenges that are thrown at you in real time, and it's that ability to read the classroom that develops in your first 3, 4, 5 years of teaching. I think most of the panel here would agree. You're in your second year, of course. You'll understand that. So to start with, I suppose, I'm going to come back to something Louis said, which is voice. Finding your voice as a teacher and your style. Now, you may have different experiences on your internship. You may have mentors that are very encouraging of you to develop your own style. You may have mentors who say, copy me. You may have mentors who, don't give you that kind of sense of control. What you have to realise is that the internship was an opportunity for you to look at what works for you and what doesn't work for you as a practitioner. Okay, so I can tell you now, in my experience of 21 years, shouting is counterproductive. I think Louis would agree with me here. It's the worst form of communication you could possibly find with any child. Okay? None of us respond to being shouted at, I would imagine, all right? It's the kind of thing that you really don't want to be considering. But in week 7, week 8, when you're tired, it can be a default setting. You've got to be very, very careful with your energy levels, all right? So one thing that we don't really look at is our own self-worth as teachers, our own well-being. You've got to be getting your sleep. You've got to be making sure that you're eating properly. You've got to make sure you have something outside the classroom that is a release, a safety valve. You have to have that. And it's really easy in your first term to sacrifice everything in order to make sure your lessons are very well planned and very well. Guess what? Man plans and God laughs. All right? I guarantee you something will happen in that classroom that you haven't prepared for. So coming back to what I was saying, your voice. You walk into that classroom 3 or 4 days before you're thinking about your approach. The first thing I would suggest you do as a teacher is listen. Not speak, listen. We're always very up for issuing instructions in classrooms. Here are my rules. This is what I expect. You need to listen, all right? So when you're in that first lesson, you're introducing yourself, all right? You're watching the responses, and when the responses are coming back to you, you're listening to what is being said, and you're reading that classroom in real time. Who are going to be the troublemakers, What are you going to do with those people? Are you going to move them together? Are you going to move them separately? Are you going to configure your classroom in a freestyle where you allow them to choose where they sit, which is really what we'd all like to do? Are you going to move certain people away from each other? These are things that will become apparent in the first 2, 3, 4 lessons. It could be that 1 or 2 students are away in any given lesson. The entire chemistry of the room changes. You can have the same lesson with the same kids at a different time of day, completely different again. All right? Students are very, very susceptible to things like wind or rain. That can affect behaviour.
Like horses.
They're like horses, they get spooked. It's true. It's really true. All right? I take my own daughter as an example in year 7 over there. All right? I saw her cohort running around on a windy day the other day. Complete animals. You know what I mean? It happens. All right? And we need to be ready and I suppose releasing ourselves enough to realise that classroom management is precisely that's management. It's not perfection. All right? So one day you'll come out with something and you'll go, this is not going to work, and you surprise yourself, it actually really works. Other times you go, this is going to be a surefire success, and it doesn't work for whichever reason. That's fine. That's part of the vagaries of being a first-year teacher. All right? So communication and listening, these are the two areas I really want to concentrate on to start with. When we first go into a classroom, one of the first things that we're eliciting to try and find, ironically, is control. And one of the classic mistakes we can make as educational practitioners in our first year is to be too controlling. You want to control everything, right? So you can jump on every single little rule, and there's no freedom, there's no oxygen in your room. And you starve it of any creativity, you starve it of any enjoyment. Okay, the other approach is where everything goes, and then there's no control in the classroom. All right? So you need to try and find some kind of happy medium, and reading that is going to be the thing, you know? So you look at that and go, okay, well, what I'll do is I'll set up a small activity, a short activity, perhaps a discussion-based activity to start off with in my chosen field, and let's see what answers come back to me. So I'll give you an example. At the moment, we're studying Animal Farm in my Year 9 English class. Who's read Animal Farm? Anybody here? Right, very good. So the other day, what Liam and I actually planned at my school, we gave them all a quiz, and then every single time that the quiz ended, we gave everybody the same mark, because that was communism, all right? Anybody who complains got taken out of the room, because that's what happens on Animal Farm, all right? So we're teaching them about a concept without giving it a name. And we're seeing which students cottoned on quicker than others, which students were compliant, which students decided to challenge. And then we fed back to them at the end. And they really enjoyed that, because there was some kind of real world application for them, some way of them connecting with the text that we were studying, okay? Now, it doesn't matter whether you're an experienced teacher or a first-year teacher, you can still deliver that lesson together, all right? You can still deliver that lesson, and you can find some kind of positive outcome straight away. So the first thing you're trying to elicit from any classroom is a positive outcome, all right? And there might be a small activity to break the ice like that, all right? Once you've got those kind of positive outcomes, you can start to build a rapport, okay? And trust me, rapport is the key. This is what you're trying to really establish in your first, I'd say, 3 to 6 months of teaching, is rapport, all right? Because it will save you a lot of time and a lot of effort, and then you start to get parental emails in which are positive, you know? Oh, so-and-so really enjoys your classroom, they feel really valued, and that allows you then to read what you need to do to keep that happiness level where it needs to be, okay? So communication is 90% of the job. And the other thing to remember, of course, is the animal thing in us, non-verbal communication is the key. So rather than shout, you're better off just pausing. Like that. Would you agree? All right? You make the same point without having to raise your voice. Because raising your voice at a child is really the last resort, unless they're going to cause harm to another child. And you have to, obviously interject at that point. It's really not the place you need to go. Okay? So the most important thing to understand is communication is the key, and then it's the idea of consistency. So if you looked at the rules, and really 3 or 4 days before you go into your classroom, you should be aware of what the school procedures are, whether it's at Maridati or whether it's at other schools, as to what the protocol is for certain behaviours. If you are consistent in enforcing that, and you can be very calm in enforcing it, very consistent in enforcing it, most students, certainly teenage boys, will stop running at a brick wall after a while, because it becomes too much effort. You don't need to be putting punitive measures in place, you just enforce the rule, And it may be your personal classroom rule about, for instance, handing homework in on time. Drafting is a big thing in my subject area, in English. And very often you get students who try to push the envelope. They'll try and email you on a Sunday at 10 o'clock in the evening. And then on Monday they come up to you and go, "Where's my draft?" And you're wondering who's working for whom at this point. Do you know what I mean? So it might be that you put a personal boundary in place for yourself in terms of your practice and go, "I'm not looking at emails on a Sunday." You've got to be kind to yourself and have some kind of boundary in place for yourself. Because if you have a boundary in place for yourself, your students will respect that boundary, and then they can start to enforce their own boundaries for themselves. They learn by example. Okay? That's the most effective thing to understand. So that calm, considered, calculated consistency is really, really important in a classroom. Okay? And once you've established that, and you've established that rapport, and it does take months, perhaps even your first year, you might argue, I don't know, right? I think that's when the rapport comes in, and that's when you can start to not loosen off, but you've got the control of what you need to get across in your curriculum, then you can start to let them give back to you. You can release a little bit. You can plan slightly more open plan lessons, because you know full well, if you let them go and you achieve what Louis is suggesting, which is let them show you what they need, you can always bring it back to where you need it to be. You'll let it guide. You know what I mean? Rather than instruct, tell them this is what you believe. You want students to understand that they actually have a voice. They do actually have the freedom to be able to say, well, I think this is probably the case, or I think this is actually the viewpoint I'd like to look at. So debating is a really key thing in my subject area. Never be afraid to start a debate in your classroom. Let them look at a rule. Let them challenge something. If they can prove it, happy days. That's exactly what you want. You want free thinking in that sense. But they do need to understand too, students, that with free thinking there needs to be a discipline behind it, a process. All right? And that process is going to be modelled by you and by the boundaries that you put in place to ensure, one, their safety, and two, that their learning is going to be at its optimum. And like I say, going all the way back to the beginning, it comes back to those first 3 or 4 days before you even walk into a classroom. What are you looking to achieve? Are you just going to walk into your classroom on your first day and hope it goes well? Or are you going to walk in and think, it's going to go well? That preparation, that mental side of the profession is something we don't probably pay enough attention to, I feel. You know what I mean? And it's something that in terms of your preparation as a professional, if you want to get across the idea that you are somebody who needs to be listened to, you've got to earn that from them. And the most important thing is, if they see that you respect them, that respect is going to come back to you. And it doesn't matter whether we're talking state, education, independent. It doesn't matter. All right? That's a basic principle of life. You give it out and you get it back. Okay, so that's a really, really important thing to understand. And eventually what that leads to, that rapport leads to trust. That implicit trust between you as a teacher and them as a student. And that's the most valuable area you can possibly be in. Once you have their trust, then they're going to move mountains. And trust me, that's harder than it sounds in week 7 or week 8 of the term, when you're tired and it's raining. I'm sure Tim at the end there is nodding in agreement. All right? But it's true, and it's something that you've got to understand. It's a marathon. A school year is a marathon. All right? And it takes time to learn that. And very often we can go out and we go, right, I'm going to literally lesson plan like I did at uni for every single lesson. You'll burn out in 3 weeks. I guarantee you. All right? You cannot plan to that same level. So you have to look at it, take the scheme of work, look at it and go, that worked quite well, that didn't work quite so well. All right? So I'm going to tailor that in my next lesson and move this here. You know what I mean? Sometimes you have to change things in real time. That's okay. Sometimes things work, sometimes they don't. That's okay as well. All right? The only failure you might possibly experience there is a failure to adapt. If you don't adapt to your style and you continually fail, then there's an issue with process there. All right? But that's something that I think everybody in the room here would understand. No one wants to keep running into that barrier. You know what I mean? You might have a lesson where a kid throws a desk over or has a tantrum. I had one a few weeks ago. All right? And the most important thing to understand is at that point in time, you stay calmer. Because every single other person in that room is watching you at that point. All right? And they're looking at your reaction as some form of guide. Okay? And that's a really, really important thing to understand, is that you are, whether you like it or not, in a position of real responsibility. Okay? In that sense. So that calm and that orderly, I suppose, environment will come with trust and with rapport. Okay? And then, that's when the gold happens. That's when you can play. And Louis is correct. Some of the elements of our system really do need review. Okay? But we work within the constraints we have as well. That's my corollary to that. And so you look at it and go, what can actually be achieved in the environment I have? The first thing is control of my own practice. The second thing will flow from that. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.